The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 10th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. The Gospel of the Lord. So it has been really sort of depressing and distressing lately to watch what's going on in Israel and Gaza, especially now with attacks starting from Iran. I have often said when I've gone on a Holy Land trip that there is always the potential for violence and conflict to spring up, but it's usually small and quickly contained and with few dangers to people who are not directly involved in the conflict. But this really is different, and it's worse, and sadly has the potential to escalate and drag on for a long time. And although I feel really guilty about thinking this, over the past few months, I kept having this feeling and thought of, boy, I am so glad we got a chance to do a Holy Land trip in 2019, because it may be a long, long time before we're able to do that again. I feel guilty about that because I have met lots of Israelis and Palestinians, none of whom are causing this mess, all of whom are caught in the crossfire. And I have loved doing those trips because I always learn things about some of the biblical stories and images that just cannot be learned by just reading books. You need to actually see the place and travel the geography and meet the many different people who live there. And among the groups of people who I've met when I've been there are shepherds. And every year on this fourth Sunday of Easter, we read all these things about Jesus saying, I am the good shepherd. But the problem for most 21st century Americans is that most of us have rarely, if ever, seen a shepherd. And even if we had, being a shepherd in 21st century America is often pretty different than being a shepherd in first century Israel. But one of the things I've learned in my Holy Land trips is that shepherds in the Middle East often continue to function a lot like shepherds did in the first century. And shepherds and their flocks are still common sights, especially if your tour group is running late. Then you can almost always be certain that a flock of sheep will be blocking the road. And so, as I have observed and been taught about these shepherds, I've learned three things about shepherds that color my understanding of what Jesus is talking about in these readings. Because we often romanticize shepherds from these little pictures of, these sweet, carefree people who sit around on hillsides, nice, pleasant, grassy hillsides, watching over the sheep and just kind of snoozing. But in the Middle East, shepherds are people who get down and dirty with the sheep. I have actually never, ever seen a shepherd who is not actually really dirty. In fact, you can often smell the shepherds before you see the shepherds, along with the sheep. When you get near the flock, both the sheep and the shepherds, they stink. And this is why shepherds were not considered members of polite society in Jesus' day. And it's part of the reason they were relegated to the outskirts of towns and settlements. So when you go to Bethlehem and you see the shepherds' fields, they're not fields. They are deep hillsides, and they're downwind because that's where you put the shepherds, and there's very little grass there also. Shepherds are people who really do have to assume risks and dangers. Because they were relegated and still are to the outskirts, even today, there are wild animals, thieves, and very little help if you get into trouble. You are far, far away from anybody who can help you. This is also part of the reason that those shepherds' fields I told you about in Bethlehem are down in the valley. The town is built up on the hill. The town and the hill are defensible in case of attack. The shepherds, they're expendable. That's where they are. They assume that kind of danger to watch the sheep. And shepherds, maybe most importantly of all, live in the midst of chaos. Those sheep wander across the road and get in the way of the bus, not because the shepherds sent them there. They just wander all over the place, and they get lost. They don't necessarily stay together. Far from watching peacefully while the sheep graze in the field, shepherds are constantly managing the chaos. If you are a type A personality, like me, who likes things to be neat and in order, shepherd is a really bad career choice for you. And so when Jesus talks about being the good shepherd, he's making it clear that he willingly accepts getting down and dirty with us. In Jesus, God is not going to be aloof and watching from afar. And it's important to remember that this whole Good Shepherd dialogue that's going on is Jesus' own commentary about what he has just done when he healed the man born blind. And in order to do that, he did one of the most disgusting things Jesus does in the entire gospel. He spits in the ground, makes mud, smears it in the guy's eye, and says, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." But in the process of doing that, he has actually gotten down and played in the mud. He has done what shepherds do. They get down and dirty with the sheep. Jesus, in saying that he is the good shepherd, is making it clear that he willingly accepts risks and dangers. Because the easy way to deal with danger is to run away. But that doesn't stop the danger to the sheep. Jesus, in what he's doing, is making people upset with him, and it's finally why they crucify him. But in today's gospel reading, Jesus says, nobody takes my life from me. Nobody does this. This is not a terrible conspiracy that I wasn't able to get out of. I lay it down of my own accord. I pick it up again. I willingly assume the risk. Jesus is not willing to let the sheep simply face their own dangers. He's in it with us. And Jesus is also saying here, when he says, "I'm the good shepherd," it means that he is committed to living with us in the chaos. Because there were neat and orderly ways to live in religious community in Jesus' day. You could stay in the temple or simply teach in the synagogues. And Jesus did those things, but he was also constantly in the midst of the chaos and the confusion of life, because that is where the sheep live. So having a shepherd like that also should make a difference in how we face life. Because while a shepherd can run away from all that mess and all those risks and all the chaos, we often cannot. And so these words of Jesus are intended to assure us that Jesus is with us when we face the messes in our daily lives. Whether we have a shepherd or not, our lives are often a mess and filled with messes. But Jesus, as our shepherd, means that the dirt and the mess is sometimes the way God works to bring us healing, just as it was a vehicle of healing for the man born blind. That Jesus can use some of those messes to actually work in our lives. Sometimes I look for God outside of the mess of my life, but sometimes Jesus is working within that mess to help me and to guide me and to point me into new directions. Jesus is intending to assure us that he's with us when we face the inherent risks of living and the inherent danger that comes just with life. I think one of the things that often happens for 21st century Americans is we often like to think that we can insulate ourselves from risk. We have all kinds of rules and regulations that try to tell us if we just do these things, nothing bad will happen to us, or at least nothing really bad. One of the other things I feel really guilty about sometimes is I'm thinking, I'm watching all this stuff in the Middle East, is that, well, thank God I don't have to worry about bombs and missiles and drones hitting my house, or at least I don't think I do. But we all have all kinds of things that can happen to us just in our daily lives and living. So last week I went out and drove over to Fairfax and bought a new table saw at Rockler. Ooh, this excites me a lot. And after I bought the whole thing, and everything, the guy who's checking, one of the guys checking me out, he says, I need you to see this. This is a very, very safe saw. It's built with all kinds of safety features. I want to show you the 3 ways that you can really injure yourself badly with a table saw. And I said to him, there are not 3 ways that you can injure yourself with a table saw. There's at least 1,000 ways that I know you can injure yourself with a table saw, because then I let him show me all 3 of these ways. All 3 of these ways, he's like, if you don't do this, this can happen. Yep, that's happened to me. If you don't do this, this can happen. Yep, that's happened too. I know all these things. And in some respects, I've been lucky. That's just why I buy all the safety features. But honestly, I drove out 66 to get to Fairfax, and that in itself is a risky thing to do. The reality is that all of life involves risk, whether we're thinking about it or not. When Jesus talks about being our shepherd, he means that we will not face the risks alone, even if we don't think about the risks that much, and even if we like to pretend that they're not really there or not as bad as maybe some other people face. Jesus does not promise to eliminate the risks or tell us that the risks won't hurt us, but he does promise that we will not face those things alone. He means that he's always going to be there to help us deal with them and walk with us. And Jesus also means, if he's the good shepherd, that he will be with us along with all the chaos that the world surrounds us with. Because much of the world lately really does seem consumed by chaos. And in the Old Testament, it's important to remember that the opposite of what God does in creation, in the creation story, is not to create something from nothing. God creates order out of chaos. This is there's this big thing of chaos, and God separates it and creates chaos and creates order. The opposite of life is not death so much in the Old Testament as it is the chaos that destroys everything. Death is the ultimate chaos that destroys life and creation. But Jesus promises as our shepherd that in the end, that chaos does not win. It doesn't win for Jesus. It doesn't win for us. It doesn't win for those we love. Resurrection is God's ultimate act of taming the chaos and restoring life. So Jesus wants to give us the courage and the fortitude to know that the chaos will not ultimately be the end of us, even if, like the conflicts that depress us so often, it seems like the chaos may go on for quite a while yet. Whenever I've watched those Middle Eastern shepherds, deep down, I always think to myself, I really wouldn't want a job with this much mess, risk, or chaos involved. But then I realized that even if it's not in such obvious ways, my life and yours are always going to be filled with those things, whether we want it to be or not. And that's why it's good to be reminded that Jesus is like the Good Shepherd, who often shows up in the worst messes of our lives. Jesus is like a good shepherd who stands with us and helps us through the dangers and inherent risks of living. And most of all, Jesus is a good shepherd who guides us through the chaos of the moment and into the promise of new life. Amen.